Story 1. About 8 years ago, I sold a used car. The engine light was on, the air conditioning needed recharging, and the fuel pump or something was out. I went to my local, trusted sales site. The ad went up with a few pictures and the words, "I work unusual hours, so I may not be able to accept a phone call. Please only text me." Hooray for working swings and midnights, right? It was actually college classes, but it was the same thing for me. A few days in, I got a pretty standard text. "Hi, I'm Matt. Is your car still for sale?" Matt isn't his real name, but you get the idea. I texted back that it was. A few standard texts about price, why the engine light was on, who I got the quote from. I listed an approximate price on the repairs as quoted from my trusted mechanic, and whatnot went back and forth. The next day, I got a text from him saying, "Are you going to take all your stuff out of the car before you sell it to me? Or is that my job?" Unwarranted hostility? Really? What the heck, man? He wasn't the only interested party, so I texted him back. "I'm not selling the car to you, so don't worry about it." I never said I would sell it to him. He never asked if he was the only interested party, and others were already arranging test drives. I didn't need him and his less than full price, partial commitment. And the stuff he was complaining about was 3 textbooks and a bag I keep clothes in. 4 things. This guy didn't like to take no for an answer and started calling and texting about how my car's paint was peeling true. But the pictures and description said so, and how dare I ask so much $1,000 for a piece of junk. I started replying for a time, telling him he wasn't going to get the car, that I had other interested buyers, so he didn't need to worry about it, etc. Then things got personal. This site gave you the option to link to Facebook, so you could post at both places at the same time. So I didn't have my privacy settings turned down, as it was still early in Facebook's absolute reign, and I actually trusted them at the time. Silly me, I know. I hadn't anticipated that he would be able to find my information through the website's post and find my name, my location, pictures of my kid, my mother-in-law's obituary, etc. Surprise me, he did. He started texting me about how I should be ashamed of myself for saying no to him, a muscular dude, and me being a quite round female. He included a picture in one text, and he wasn't the muscular, built man he claimed to be. He looked like a bean pole with 2 ab muscles, so, what the heck, dude? He asked me if I even knew everything about cars, or if I made the post while on my period, so I didn't know what I was talking about. He texted that I should be lucky I was already married, or else he would come to my house and show me how a real man handles a little jerk. He got close but didn't have an address, and the way my address pulls up on GPS, he never would find my apartment, thankfully. Small side note, since I was in college at the time and needed a more flexible schedule, I worked as a school crossing guard. Every 2 weeks or so, we'd go in to sign our time cards in order to get paid. This crossing guard gig was hired through my local police department. Not all crossing guard gigs are the same, but this one was. During one of these visits to the office, I was using my phone while I was waiting for my boss to get to me, my name being low in the alphabet. I hadn't yet blocked the dude, as it hadn't been long since this started, and I was hoping it would fizzle on its own. I didn't check my phone in class, choosing to turn it off to avoid getting distracted by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder on it the entire day, and I was often flooded with several hours of text all at once. What I saw on my phone drove me over the cliff. He started texting about pictures I had posted on Facebook about my 8 or 7-year-old son. He had just majorly crossed the line. The cleanest version of his text included things like, "Your kid is just as ugly as you are. I hope you don't plan on him leaving home to get a wife anytime soon." And how a smudge of dirt on his face from a day at the zoo looked like I beat him. "I didn't sell you a car, and you're taking out your rage by threatening to assault me and accusing me of beating my kid." Oh heck no. Apparently, I was loud when I said what I did, because my boss stepped right over to me next and asked what was wrong. Great person. 10 out of 10. I told her that I was getting these abusive texts from a random person who tried to buy my car. I told her I was about to erase the text and block him. But she was like, "No, wait, don't do that. Let me see your phone. I'm so happy I didn't delete them because this next part still makes my heart sore." I offered, and she took my phone, reading all the sick and vile things he texted me. She told me to wait until she'd cleared the lobby of the other crossing guards, so I did. She then told me to follow her behind the security doors at the police department station, still with my phone. I didn't know what was happening, but I liked and trusted her, so I did. I followed her back to her office, where she worked on her computer, referring to my phone on occasion. She asked if all I had was the phone number or if I had his name too. I told her I only got a first name and scrolled to the text where he introduced himself. A semi-uncomfortable amount of time later, she handed back my phone. Something to mention, my boss isn't just administrative. I didn't know it at the time, but she's a full-on lieutenant in the local police department. She came up the ranks from patrol, moving to a position where she exclusively investigated child, elder, and disabled abuse complaints before moving into her current desk position. Needless to say, she didn't take people threatening harm to kids lightly. Because I hadn't blocked the number, I still had the text messages with the dude's name, and she had used them to cross-search him and the phone number. Long story short, she knew exactly who he was. She said not to worry, but don't delete or respond to his text anymore. She had it. If it got worse, I should call her or 911, as appropriate, right away. Unconcerned and happy she had the situation in hand, I left and went to class. When I went back to the office to sign my next time card 2 weeks later, I had several unread texts from the guy. I had filtered them, so I didn't see them pop up and hadn't read them. I had sold the car for the full asking price and had all but forgotten the entire situation. My boss told me to wait for her again as she had something else for me to sign, and I again returned to her office. She briefly explained what she had for me as an actionable complaint that she needed me to sign from my issue 2 weeks ago. I remembered everything all over again. She must have seen my face because she told me not to worry and that she could tell me more about what was going on after I actually signed the form. So I did. Dear readers, this is the best situation anyone could have asked for. The phone number was tied to many people as the provider was known for cheap cell service for those that were desperate for a way to contact people, services, or employment. But with the name Matt again, a fake name, she was able to find out who was messing with me. She then got a driver's license, which led to an address, which led to a police report for possible domestic violence. Fall down the rabbit hole some more, and you find out that this dude had 5 kids by 4 women, and he was in arrears on his child support to them all. He hadn't been paying for 10+ years, and it was in the neighborhood of $30,000–$50,000, if memory serves. But somehow, just 2 weeks ago, he requested a title transfer for a new to him, quite fancy old car. I don't remember the kind, but think high-end car show and massive insurance premiums. Being so far in arrears meant that my boss was able to place a seizure order on the car so it could be sold to pay back the child support. One of the baby mama's lives in a state where fleeing child support means you could have a warrant issued for your arrest. When she called the interested parties in that state to see if they wanted her to execute the arrest warrant, they said, yes, with much haste. That was a funny turn of phrase, so I always remembered it. One conversation later, and my boss was able to determine that he was using the brother's social security number on his employment forms to avoid child support garnishments. This is all sorts of illegal, so she notified the guy's human resources department so it could be corrected. They informed her that he would be fired for fraudulently submitting false documents. She then told me that, about 4 days ago, she had executed the warrant on the dude for felony child abandonment, and that the state he was to be held in was already en route to pick him up. It carried an 8–12-year sentence, and he still had to pay his back child support. I could have dealt with a comment. I could have dealt with not taking no for an answer. I could have even dealt with a cyber stalking, a little. But when your twisted mind okays you to bring my kid into the picture, you've crossed the line. If you had stopped at no, you wouldn't be in jail right now. Story 2. It was supposed to be a fun day out with my family after the big baseball game. My dad, my younger brother, and I decided to stop at the local McDonald's to grab a quick bite to eat before heading home. As we were getting into my dad's truck with our food, an Indian man pulled up next to us and flung his car door open, putting a decent-sized dent in the side of my dad's truck. Now, my dad runs a small auto repair shop, so a little dent like that was no big deal for him. He approached the Indian man and calmly explained that he could easily fix the dent for around $60, no problem. But this guy just would not have it. Indian man, no way. Man, that's your fault for parking so close to me. It was the wind, I swear. Dad, look, I'm not looking to make a big deal out of this. I can fix it myself for cheap. Just give me the money and we can call it a day. Indian man, screw you. I'm not paying for your crappy parking job. This is your problem, not mine. At this point, the Indian man started getting aggressive, swearing at my dad and even bringing my younger brother and me into the argument, which really set my dad off. My dad is usually a pretty laid-back guy, but when someone starts disrespecting his family, he doesn't hold back. Dad, that's it, I'm calling the cops. Let them sort this out. Indian man, go ahead, call the cops. They'll defend me, you'll see. So my dad pulls out his phone and dials 911. Within about 15 minutes, an unmarked police car pulls up, and an officer gets out to assess the situation. He listens to both sides of the story and then turns to my brother and me, asking for our accounts of what happened. We told him everything, how the Indian man had opened his door and dented the truck, and how he was refusing to take responsibility or pay for the repairs. The officer started writing the Indian man a ticket, and that's when things took an even crazier turn. Indian man, I fucking hate cops. Asterisk gives the officer the middle finger asterisk. The officer who had been writing the ticket didn't see the gesture, but a second officer who had just arrived on the scene definitely did. He immediately pulled out his handcuffs and moved in to arrest the Indian man. The Indian man tried to pull away and run, but the two officers, along with my dad, managed to grab him and cuff him. They ended up booking him for resisting arrest, making threats towards law enforcement, and something involving minors, likely referring to my brother and me, even though we weren't involved at all. As they were taking the Indian man away, we noticed in the back seat of his car there were balloons, probably for a little girl's 3rd birthday party or something. It was a sad and frustrating situation all around. My dad ended up fixing the dent on his truck himself, which would have cost over $100 for anyone else to do. The Indian man, on the other hand, probably spent a few days in jail and had to pay a hefty fine for his behavior. I guess he learned the hard way that you can't just go around damaging other people's property and then expect to get away with it. The whole ordeal was just ridiculous, but I'm glad my dad stayed calm and handled it the right way by calling the authorities. I have a feeling that if he hadn't, that Indian man would have just continued to escalate the situation and make things even worse. Sometimes you just have to let the law handle entitled people like that. Story 3. It was August 2017, and I was out at a bar catching up with an old friend. We were having a nice conversation, and things were starting to get a bit flirty between us. Little did I know, the night was about to take a turn for the worse. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my friend's other friend came barreling towards us. Before I could even react, she kicked me as hard as she could right in the groin. The pain was excruciating, and I immediately dropped to the ground, gasping for air. Everyone in the bar just stared, unsure of what to do. After what felt like an eternity, the bouncer finally came over and practically dragged me out of the bar. My friend kept apologizing profusely, but I was in no state to respond. I quickly called an Uber and headed straight to the hospital. Turns out, the kick had ruptured my left testicle. The doctors said that if I hadn't gotten there so quickly, they would have had to remove it entirely. As it was, they were able to operate and save it, but they warned me that it would likely have reduced functionality going forward. Needless to say, I was absolutely furious. I immediately filed a police report, and the officers took it very seriously. They were able to gather video footage from the bar, as well as eyewitness accounts and statements from everyone involved, including the girl who had kicked me. The police told me that based on the evidence they had collected, the charges against her would definitely stick. However, they also warned me that she might get a relatively light punishment. Apparently, she was a straight-A student with no prior criminal record, came from a wealthy family, and had retained a high-powered lawyer, and of course, the fact that she was a young, white woman also seemed to play a role in their prediction. The girl's lawyer actually reached out to me, offering a written apology and suggesting that a criminal record would prevent her from becoming a teacher, which was her dream. He hoped that would sway me to drop the charges, but I wasn't having any of it. This girl had literally popped my testicle for no good reason, and she had to face the consequences. After almost 2 years, the girl was finally convicted. She ended up spending about 3 weeks in jail, paying a fine, and being ordered to do community service. Most importantly, she now has a criminal record, which means she can't become a teacher as she had planned. Throughout the whole process, the girl contacted me numerous times, begging me to drop the charges. She claimed it was just a drunken mistake and that she had never hurt anyone before. But I didn't care. She had caused me immense physical and emotional pain, and I was determined to see her punished for it. Looking back, I'm glad I stuck to my guns and pushed for the charges. It wasn't easy, and the whole ordeal was incredibly stressful. But in the end, justice was served, and that entitled, violent girl learned that her actions had consequences. It may not have been the harshest punishment, but it was something, and that's what mattered to me. Story 4. When my daughter was 11, the only thing she wanted for her birthday was some heavy-duty rope so she and her brother could play in the woods with it and do things like make tree swings. My husband and I went to Home Depot and bought her something like 15 feet of rope that ended up costing about $1.50. We wanted her to have some nice rope. It was an unusual thing for a little girl to ask for her birthday, but we wanted her to be able to use it the way she was imagining, so we didn't mind spending more than we'd expected getting this rope. At the time, we lived in this enormous planned community that had hundreds of acres of natural areas and parks filled with big, old live oaks, so plenty of trees for everyone in the community to enjoy in whatever way they pleased. One day, my daughter, our son, and 2 friends of theirs took the rope to a nearby park and looped it around some tree branches to swing off of. They were minding their own business in the park when this little boy of about 4 approached them, watching them swinging. They asked if he wanted to try, but he said his mother wouldn't let him. They said okay and went back to swinging. Pretty soon, the little boy's mother came over and told them they needed to untie the rope and leave the park because her son was too young to swing, and it wasn't fair that he had to watch them have fun while he couldn't. Now, for safety's sake, I had trained my kids that they didn't have to do anything that a strange adult told them to do, and if a stranger asked them to do anything, they should give the adult my phone number and tell them to call me, which is what my daughter did. The entitled mother snorted and said, "I don't need to talk to your mother." She then walked back to where she and some other mothers had been having a picnic and got a small knife. Then came back and cut my daughter's rope off the tree. My children were terrified that this troublesome lady came at them with a knife and cut the rope, and they came flying home on their bikes, extremely upset. When they told me the story, I was very upset. I'd been in a car accident a few weeks prior and had a broken pelvis. I was just to the point where I was able to walk okay using a walker, but I wasn't supposed to be driving yet. However, I was so angry that I put my walker in my van and drove to the park, looking for the woman my children had described. She was still there and was very smug and not at all sorry. I introduced myself and told her I was the mother of the kids with the rope. She told me the same story my kids had and admitted she had cut the rope because her son wasn't old enough to swing. I was astounded. I believed what my kids were saying, but I'd assumed the mother would spin it that she was worried my kids were hurting the tree or something. I told her, "You're going to need to pay for that rope you destroyed. That was my daughter's birthday present, and you had no right to cut it." She said, "I don't think so. I'm not paying for anything." I wasn't sure what to do at this point. but I asked her for her name and address, and she stupidly gave it to me. She kind of laughed and said, "Sure, I'll give you my name. I've got nothing to hide." I hobbled back to my van and went home, seething with anger. I called my husband, and he immediately said, "Call the police," which I did. A police officer came within about 20 minutes since we lived in a pretty small town, and I told him the story. He said, "That's destruction of property, and she can't do that." She lived within walking distance of my house, so he drove up there to talk to her and was back within a few minutes, saying, "She says she'll pay for the rope now, or you can press charges and I'll arrest her. It's your choice." I was pretty surprised to hear that she could get arrested over destroying $50 of rope, because that really hadn't occurred to me. I thought maybe she'd get a ticket or something. When it comes to my kids, I'm a protective mother, and by this point, I wanted this lady to spend a few hours in the county jail. But I didn't want to be unreasonably vindictive either. I asked the officer what he thought I should do, but he said he couldn't make that choice for me. I called my husband again, and he said, "Press charges. You already gave her an opportunity to pay for the rope, and she didn't want to." When I told the officer I wanted to press charges, he smiled and said, "That's the right choice. You gave her a chance to pay." He told me he was going back to her house to arrest her. I assume he did, though I never heard anything further about it. We ended up having to buy my daughter some new rope ourselves, but it was worth it to put that entitled mother in her place. Story 5. Here is the content rewritten to identify and fix grammatical and punctuation errors, without changing the sentences or decreasing the word count. The expletives have been replaced with mild alternatives, and any acronyms or initials have been referred to with what they actually mean while writing the story. Code words have been used for any illegal substances or drugs. While the city I live in is a little, quite crowded with residents, students, and other people, there are some really nice little parks in the city Nottingham, for anyone who cares. On this particular bright and sunny spring day late May, I had decided to go and sit under a tree, read my book, and enjoy some sunshine, a sadly lacking commodity in the United Kingdom. Entitled Mother, what are you doing? Me, wait, what? Quite witty, right? Entitled Mother, you can't be here. The entitled mothers in this city lack a certain class. Me, in the park? Entitled Mother, this is the children's play area. You have to leave. Me, ha! I was enjoying my book, so my usual quick-witted response was somewhat absent. I look over, and sure enough, there was a children's play area about 20 feet away, fenced off and full of the usual equipment, with a couple of boisterous children running around and shouting at each other. I go back to my book. The entitled mother starts screeching, but, unusually for her type, doesn't attempt to take my electronic reading device. Thinking back, it may be because I'm a shaven-headed adult with a forked beard and upper body muscles that can be seen through my clothes. My physical training has made me quite bulky. The entitled mother wanders off. I figure all is done, and I try to get back into my book. We all know that no entitled mother just wanders off when thwarted. Sure enough, this troublemaker comes back with an actual police officer. Baffled policeman, "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you about some very serious accusations this lady has made." Me, huh? It was a really good book, and I was distracted. Baffled policeman, "This lady says that you were talking to her children and taking photos of them and asking them to go with you." Me, wait, what? Allow me to explain. I work in film and television. An accusation like this, even just a charge sheet, could end my career and everything I've spent years working for. I am ice cold with panic. My heart is, despite the odds, somehow not beating, and yet beating like that of a hummingbird on illegal substances. Then my brain kicks in, and I start laughing. Entitled mother, asterisk screeches unintelligibly asterisk. Baffled policeman, "Sir, this isn't a laughing matter, it's very serious." Me, exactly how was I taking these pictures? Entitled mother, he was following them around with his phone. And this is why I was laughing, as my phone was in for repairs, and the only phone I had with me was a 15-pound basic flip phone that literally didn't have a camera. It could only call and text. Me. Here you go, officer. Asterisk hands over the phone asterisk. Feel free to check out my phone. It has no camera. Entitled mother. Wait, I meant his tablet. He was using his tablet thingy. Now I'm laughing harder because this was a few months after the first generation Kindle Fire had been released. For those of you who don't know, it also has no camera. Me, please, officer, feel free to check this as well. Asterisk hands over the tablet asterisk note the lack of a camera. Baffled policeman. So, you don't have a camera? Me, nope, I was just sitting here reading a book when this person started shouting at me about her kids. Which she's left by themselves for the last 40 minutes. Just FYI. So, the officer drags the screeching entitled mother away. I tried to go back to my book, but the day was ruined. I wish there was a better conclusion, but she wasn't ever punished as far as I know, just a caution for wasting police time. But that's nothing, and I no longer go to that park because I don't feel comfortable there. Story 6. I have been a nanny for several years now, and for the most part, I've worked with lovely, reasonable families. I have contracts for every family that guarantee the hours that I work, meaning if a family goes on vacation, I still get paid because I'm technically available to work, but they choose not to use my services. This is standard in nanny contracts. Another aspect of my contract is called the nanny share, so if two families want to combine for the day, each of them pays 2/3 of my regular pay rate. I get paid a little more for watching more kids, and they save a little by only paying a portion of what they would have paid. Unfortunately, I recently had to deal with an entitled family. Let's call them Karen and Ken. They are a wealthy couple with a son named Bob. There's also another family I work with, Henry, a very sweet and generous single dad who lost his husband a few years ago and dotes on his son, Steve. A few weeks ago, Karen and Ken's family went to Hawaii, and per my contract, I was to be paid as usual. Before they left, they asked if I could come in and watch Bob the Sunday after they returned so that they could recover and rest. I agreed, and my hours were set at 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. that Sunday. They went on the trip, everything was wonderful, and they texted me when they landed, saying they would see me at 8 a.m. The next day, when I was about to head out the door at 7:30 a.m., I received a text saying that Bob was just waking up, so I should just show up at 8:30 instead. After the day of nannying, Karen asked if I would stay past my regular hours during the upcoming week so that they could have 2 date nights. I agreed, and Karen said she would reimburse me for all the extra hours at the end of the week, since it'd be easier just to make one payment. Totally fine with me. The week finished, and I ended up staying an extra 8 hours total for the 2 date nights. I asked Ken to pay me for 16 hours, but he said he had to talk to Karen first to double-check the hours and would pay me shortly. When I got home, I received a text from Karen saying, "Hi Meowsosaurus, thank you so much for covering for us these past few weeks. Ken and I are feeling refreshed, and the show was hilarious. Since we were in Hawaii, you were paid for an entire week while you weren't working. We don't think this is quite fair as it is a large sum of money, so we'd like to apply some of those hours to your babysitting today and yesterday. We will pay you for 8 hours instead." I was furious. I screenshotted the part of my contract that plainly stated I would be paid for any hours that their family was on vacation, and I reminded her that it was in violation of the contract. She reluctantly agreed, and I texted that it would be a total of 16 hours. Karen instantly replied and went off, texting, "On Sunday, we asked you to come in at 8:30, not 8. We are already being generous and paying you for the holiday we took. You need to be as accurate as possible with the hours that we are paying you. We will pay you for 15.5 hours. Readers, this was a difference of $12.50. I was going to screenshot the part of my contract that said any rescheduling needed a 24-hour notice, but instead, I went nuclear. You see, Bob has been tagging along with Steve and me to music class and soccer twice a week outside of Karen's regular contracted hours since January. Karen has never offered to pay for those hours, but Henry was fine with paying his full rate for those hours because Steve was having trouble making friends at school and had become close to Bob. I chose not to say anything about the slight bump in pay because I loved watching them play together. But now, it was malicious compliance time. As Karen stated, I needed to be as accurate as possible. I calculated all the hours that Bob has joined us since January, 6 hours per week x 18 weeks, and the total amount they owed was almost $2,000. In the group chat with Karen, Ken, and Henry, I said, Karen stated that it was of utmost importance that I track the hours as accurately as possible, so I took it upon myself to double-check everything, including the share hours. Thank goodness I did. I didn't realize we had forgotten to track all the hours that Bob joined us for soccer and music. Henry, I'm so sorry, but Karen actually owes you quite a bit of money. If my calculations are correct, they owe $X to you and to me. Henry replied, Karen and Ken, I am so disappointed to hear that Meowsosaurus hasn't been compensated properly this entire time. I don't need my hours to be refunded for those hours because I wanted Steve to continue his playdates, but you need to pay Meowsosaurus's portion immediately. I got a huge chunk of money I wasn't expecting, and I am now on the hunt for my next nanny family. I'll be putting my 2 weeks' notice with Karen and Ken as soon as I do. Story 7. This story is from a few years ago. It's how I helped my sister and somehow got her company to willingly bypass their own idle time requirements. Her company went work from home after the lockdown and stayed working from home. At first, they required an always-on camera system, but that quickly went away as the amount of unintended nudity that comes from your average household is quite startling. Then they went with a system that tracks your idle time in their communication software. The number of write-ups, meetings, group meetings, and eventual terminations for what was the dumbest requirement ever caused my sister to ask for help. She sent me an Amazon link for one of those USB sticks that jiggle the mouse. I told her not to use those, as even lazy personnel can detect them. At the time, Amazon wasn't selling mechanical mouse turners yet, or at least at reasonable prices, so I looked at building one. I found an STL file for this flowery mouse holder, which I modified to be just a simple, monochromatic design, and 3D printed it. I cut out a 1.5-inch circular disc and put it on a weak motor, connecting it to a power source through USB. I set the wheel to spin every 1/12 seconds for a total of 2 seconds at a time, but ran into an issue. Sometimes the disc spinning would not actually move the mouse. I found a company that would print stickers at $1 a sticker if I ordered 5 of them. So, I found this basic pattern of squares and lines crisscrossing each other and had it printed to just under the dimensions of the disc. I stuck it on there, and the mouse turner worked perfectly. I quickly ran into another issue, though. Since the disc was raised, it quickly got hung up on the mouse with the sticker. So back into the design I went, and I made it where the dimensions were slightly larger for the base, and had it sit where the disc would be 2 mm below the actual mouse. After printing it, the mouse sat on the cradle, and the disc spun without touching. The mouse cursor would randomly just move in weird directions at the times the disc spun. So, with that all out of the way, I got a free lunch out of my sister and delivered it. It hooked into her laptop's USB port, never being detected, and would turn her wheel, decreasing her idle time down to 0. Within 2 weeks, she was recognized as a top performer. She was watching crime dramas with her volume at max until she got a notification that a customer had submitted a request. In other words, her productivity stayed exactly the same. So, she calls me up and asks if I can make more of those. Thankfully, I saved the STL files and could order more stickers if I needed. I told her I could make each one for $25. The cheapest on Amazon at the time were like $50, and it only cost me roughly $12 to make them, which went down to $8 to make them at the end. She said several coworkers were asking her about it, and she said she would just give them my number. Within a month, I had built out 50 mechanical mouse turners, which was kind of a waste, as this company only had 32 employees. I miscounted. Sometimes, I would meet 5 or more of her coworkers at a restaurant at the same time, just so I wouldn't have to drive all over the city. Then one weekend, I get a call from the CEO of that company. You see, all of his workers were using these mouse turners, and he wasn't. So, when the company published the report on idle times, his was abysmally low. That phone call was one of the most surreal I have ever had. At first, he thought I was one of his employees. I told him I wasn't. I worked for a waste management company. But I wasn't about to tell him. He asked me about the mouse turners. I told him that I designed them for a friend, but that person no longer worked for his company. Again, lies. I was protecting my sister, not like he couldn't figure it out, but still. He asked if he could get one. This is where the conversation went very weird. You see, I tried convincing him to give up the idle timer requirements, as it clearly wasn't important and only harmed his company. I laid out all of my points for it and pointed out that the CEO of the company is buying a device specifically designed to bypass his requirement. He would not budge. He was so into his company's dogma that he just wanted one from me. I already had a few left over, so I told him I could make him one for $35. Here's the really screwed up part of the story. You see, he asked for a full list of my clients, promising that no one would be fired. He just wanted to know how many. I told him that a list would be unnecessary, as it's every single one of his employees, literally all 32 excluding him. His response was to have the company reimburse each employee the $25 for the mouse turners and set it up where his company would contact me each time a new employee started. I said I had 10 left over from the initial batch of ones I made and can just give him those and have him contact me when he runs out. He agreed. Well, that kinda never happened, as a company on Amazon made what is basically the same thing I was making for like $15. Theirs is much nicer than mine was, too. So, a company set idle time requirements, which caused issues at the company. Now, the company buys devices for each employee so that it bypasses the idle timer.